Exhibit 42, but it's also relied upon by the expert. So Exhibit 42 is admitted.
Mr. Lewis, after we talked about meetings with Rhodes and other oath keepers in the immediate aftermath of January 6th at the Phoenix Hotel and at the Olive Garden, on subsequent days, were there ongoing efforts by Rhodes to continue this effort to stop the transfer of presidential power?
Yes, after Stuart Rhodes and Joshua James returned to the Texas area where Stuart Rhodes had been staying, he continued to make plans to oppose the inauguration. He made plans to oppose the peaceful transfer of presidential power, and as indicated in that letter that was just the subject of discussion, he began instructing his followers to begin making plans at the state and county level to begin to demonstrate outside the state capitals and to begin to prepare for, in his mind, the worst case scenario, which would be the successful inauguration of then President-elect Biden.
And did he have any meetings with non-oath keepers where he tried to further his efforts to stop the transfer of presidential power?
Yes, he had a meeting on January 10th with an individual by the name of Jason Alpers, who was also an intermediary between Mr. Rhodes and President Trump, someone who was connected to President Trump and who was presented to Mr. Rhodes as someone who could deliver a message to President Trump. And so they met on January 10th, 2021.
And what was the message that Rhodes wanted delivered to Trump?
It was in sum and substance nearly identical to the content of that January 14th letter that we just reviewed. It was framed as a direct introduction message. You know, it was written with, you know, a full introduction to President Trump, laying out Stuart Rhodes's background, who he was, who the Oath Keepers are, pointing him at the two open letters they had written to him in November or in December. I'm sorry, and it effectively laid out the exact same call to arms and call to action that he had laid out in both the January 14th letter that we just discussed, as well as the calls that he had made to President Trump at the Jericho March, at the December 23rd, December 14th, and previous iterations of public comments, calling on him to use any means necessary to stay in power, to reject the efforts by the left to steal the election, and to do whatever he had to do in order to remain in power.
Were any other Oath Keepers besides Rhodes present for that meeting?
Yes, Oath Keepers General Counsel Kelly Sorrell was present at that meeting, as was Joshua James and several other Oath Keepers who I do not believe have been publicly identified at that meeting.
Have you seen any evidence that any of the individuals who were either convicted or pleaded guilty to various charges after January 6th have had their Oath Keepers memberships terminated?
No, sir. There's been no evidence to suggest that anything of that sort has taken place.
Did Rhodes testify in his trial?
He did, yes.
Did you review his testimony at the trial?
I did, yes.
Is there any suggestion by Rhodes that the Oath Keepers is no longer an active entity, or is it a defunct entity?
There was no evidence to suggest that, no.
Did Rhodes say that it was a defunct entity?
No, sir. Rhodes presented the Oath Keepers as an active organization and attempted to paint them, as he has in the past, as a peaceful organization that had committed no criminal activity, but was still very much active.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any more questions right now.
Before we move on to cross-examination, which is where I think we're headed. It seems like we're at a good natural stop pause point to give everyone a chance to reset. Also, just logistics-wise, I want to discuss with the parties. We've already lost a day to weather being a problem. There's another, as I suggested yesterday, it looks like there's another weather alert for tomorrow afternoon into Thursday morning for both Palmer and the Anchorage area for another 6 to 13 inches of snow, potentially with some rain. I want to get some thoughts from the party about making sure we can continue on most expeditiously. If that involves moving online for a portion of the trial to avoid that, I'd like to hear the party's thoughts on that as well, because I want to keep us moving, and especially if we have quite a few online witnesses as it is, it's a minimal, I think, prejudice going away for just a few days to know that we can get the trial done on time, or we can keep moving to then, once those weather alerts are hopefully done, moving back to being in person. So I'm curious about the party's thoughts and positions on that.
Your Honor, we are sharing your concern that we want to make sure we get this trial done on time. And if that means that some of the days of trial have to be remote, when all of the witnesses, or 99% of the witnesses, are also remote, I think that's far better than losing another trial day and potentially going past Christmas, which would cut the court's time in issuing a decision, would cut any potential appellate review. So we would fully echo your sentiment that we should have contingency plans, and if that needs to be remote, then we need to do it remote.
Mr. Miller?
Judge, if the court's open, we would prefer it to be in the court. We've made that our position before, and that remains our position. If the court is closed, we do have an alternate location where we have decent internet. So we'll be able to comply with the court's directive if you so order that we appear by video. So
at this point, it's a bit of a contingency. You know, I'm a judge, not the weatherman, so I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but my sense is let's plan to meet tomorrow morning here, but parties should, again, check their email early, check Twitter early, just in case there is, for some reason, something comes up. Be ready to move online, and then we'll keep an eye on it as it goes through the day. And do be prepared if we do either need to break early because of weather, or if there's if Thursday ends up being another court closure, then just make preparation to be ready to be online on Thursday, if that truly does come to pass, that, you know, Wednesday into Thursday is the bulk of another storm. So I appreciate the party's flexibility. I know it's tough, but we've had some unprecedented weather events, you know, at least within the last 10 years, there hasn't been this many court closures. Let's come back otherwise at 3 o'clock to begin cross-examination. We can stand in recess.
Wow, okay. Thank you guys all for tuning in. If you're just getting here, please like and share. Due to a power outage that I just had to deal with here within the household, I had to restart back up everything that was going on for this stream. And it looks like I've even lost my camera at this point. Hopefully I can get it to come back on here and get it to reconnect. We just got done listening to the judge, and oh, hold on a second here. Sorry guys, I am trying to get this thing back up and functioning. We just got done listening to the case and listening to John Lewis, I believe is his name, and he is the prosecutors, the one Kowalke side, or the person that they brought in as the expert on extremism and terrorist domestic groups that we have within America. And he was supposed to be providing us with all the expert testimony today on what is going on. Wow, that power outage really did kill everything that I had going on here. We definitely need to be working harder towards cleaning up our election process and what is going on. The judicial branch should not be determining our elections. We should not be allowing this kind of subterfuge going on, undermining our current elections like we have going and happening within our state. Please take a moment right now to like and share this video. Be greatly appreciated. Give me just a moment here, folks. I am literally trying to get things back. Everything that had on the screen going on here, and I'm trying to get the camera to refunction once again, and it just is not acknowledging it. It shows it connected, but it's not showing it on the screen. But yes, we've been hearing for the last several hours now from John Lewis, the expert witness for the defense, or for the prosecutors trying to undermine the defense. Their entire argument is the case that is going on there in D.C. right now with the Oath Keepers and the prosecution that is occurring with those members that are there. Everything that has been presented today has been nothing but hearsay and opinions and trying to read the thoughts and motives of people that this person doesn't even know. Trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle to say that the actions of 30 Oath Keepers dictate the response and motives of all 30,000 plus of them that are in the Oath Keepers itself. This is a real disgrace to our nation when we turn things like this into politically weaponized for politics to push a certain agenda for power and control within one party, and that one party has the full say of what is going to happen. This case should have been dismissed already. It wasn't, obviously, because we're in trial now. And the first expert witness being brought forward by the prosecutor, everything he has had to say here today should be stricken from the record and completely thrown out the window as inadmissible, as hearsay and opinions and their own personal feelings on what had occurred on that day, January 6th. And to try to tie David Eastman into being a part of that extremist action when the only thing he is guilty of, if you even want to call it guilt, is being a member of the Oath Keepers, which are made up of our first responders, our police force, our firemen, our military members, active and non-active, veterans, you name it, those that we would normally hold up on a pedestal, handing them awards for and medals for honor and heroism and protecting and validating our lives and existence, protecting our liberties from the tyranny. Those are the people that they are trying to vilify with this happening right now. What it's going to take to be able to defeat all of this is for everyone out there to take a moment and like and share this video. It is folks like you that will make sure that videos like this are shared far and wide. And liking this video also helps accomplish that. It helps push past the shadow banning that is going on by Facebook right now. This video, this trial should be on national news. They should be broadcasting this on mainstream media right now for everybody to sit witness and participate in the event that is currently happening within this trial. It is sad that they have taken it to the level that they have taken it and the direction that this current case is going. I have never, this is like watching the witch hunts of the January 6th committee against President Donald J. Trump and the one-sided testimony of the expert witnesses. Fortunately, the defense here actually is able to bring their own witnesses in rebuttal, unlike with the January 6th committee, where it was a one-sided narrative, and that's exactly what it is. It's a narrative that they want to paint for everybody as being the truth by cutting and snipping little pieces of what they want you to see and hear. Same thing is going on here with this current person, John Lewis, who has been giving testimony for the last few hours. He is actively a part of the weaponization of our judicial branch and our political system that is out there using our judges to dictate what is going to be law, subverting our political process of our legislative branch and their powers of being able to decide what direction our state is to go, whether it's involving how our elections are handled, to who can actually serve in our system, in our legislative branches throughout government, whether that be on a city council, an assembly council, a member, a school board, or even as we're seeing right now in Alaska Ledge. Representative David Eastman won handily here in November. He is the duly elected representative for his district in the House. And this case right here is going to determine whether or not he's going to go to Juneau. The irony behind all of this is it will still be towards the end of the month before we get a verdict coming out of the judge for how this case will be determined. Win or lose, you can guarantee this is going to be refiled again into the Supreme Court. I'm sure it will go all the way up to there and will be pushed to the next level. I see Representative David Eastman making it into Juneau in January, and this case being pushed off through that. This is just a way that the Democrats, the far left, the ones that love their power and control keep using the system out there to manipulate everything that is going on within our state and around our nation. You see it everywhere that it is happening, and it's just atrocious that this is allowed to happen. I don't understand why our own Alaska Ledge or anybody else out there is not standing up right now and helping to combat what this is. And this isn't just this case against David Eastman. We've got several other liberty-minded cases that are coming up and that are out there right now, from censorship to who you can allow to comment on your pages and who can't. Even if it's your own personal page, you can't ban people, and that's taken it to a level that never should have happened. If you are a politician and you're running a political page that is paid for and operated by our government, then every Alaskan or every U.S. citizen should have access to it and be able to leave a comment as long as it's not going against our First Amendment rights. Like yelling fire in a crowded theater. We all know the standards, and they're pushing the boundaries to where free speech no longer matters. Just because you belong to an organization, may have never participated in any of their events, don't respond to any of their emails, you're not even, other than just being a member of it, you are guilty by association. Where does this kind of censorship end? Who's to say they won't next go after the Boy Scouts of America and say there are also domestic terrorists because they put country first over politicians and politics and their feelings of how things should be? And all the testimony we've heard from John Lewis today has been exactly that. Nothing but a bunch of feelings about how he feels about it, what he feels about it. And it's really got to come to an end. These type of partisan politics, weaponizing our judicial branch, is not why our country was founded. Lady Liberty, blindfolded, is crying underneath that blindfold right now for the destruction of our republic. They always scream, our democracy is in danger. Well, dang it, I'm glad it's in danger. We're not a democracy. Get that through your thick skulls, people. We are a republic. There is a big difference between being a democracy and a republic. And every time you hear a legislator out there, a senator, a House member, or anybody declare that our democracy is in danger, those are the people that you should be looking out and making sure that you're checking behind your back to make sure that knife is not coming towards it. Because we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. And if we wanted a democracy, that's what our founding fathers would have created, but they didn't. We live in a republic. This is a nation that is built on laws. We have our amendment rights that are each and every one of us are allowed to have and should be able to freely enjoy. And this case right here is taking away our rights to be an American citizen, or even to be able to serve out there as a member of society that is trying to work towards the greater goal. Representative David Eastman has been ostracized since the first day he ever got into office. The Alaska legislators have done everything in their power when it is convenient for them to throw him under the bus, always blame him for their failures. I can't understand why they would want to get rid of him in the first place, because obviously what they're trying to do isn't going to do a darn job, one bit of what is going on. It's not going to fix anything. It's just going to make things worse out there for everybody. So this case is supposed to re-begin here in just a couple of minutes here. And hopefully you guys are all getting this loud and clear right now. I still haven't been able to get the camera back up and running on this end, but at least the microphone portion is still working. We're just a few minutes away now from them re-beginning this back up again, and while we go back into the actual trial, I'll see about getting the camera back up and running once more. Again, this is part 2, take 2 of the second half of today. Due to a power outage, everything shut down here and I had to restart it all back up. And when it restarted, of course, half of the equipment shut down because it all needs power to run. Take a moment, like and share this video. If you're not following us on Twitter, you're not following us on YouTube, you're not following us on Rumble, and you're not following us here at Politadick on Facebook, do so now. And make sure you hit that notification bell so that you get notified every time we go live. YouTube is one of the most important ones to get signed up on right now, because YouTube is guaranteeing that you get notified every time we go live, where Facebook hasn't been doing it for several weeks now. They have re-begun.
I am. All right. Mr. Kreiner, can you hear me okay?
Mr. Lewis, but yes, I can hear you.
I was just looking at Mr. Kreiner's deposition, so maybe we'll start there. Have you had a chance to look at his deposition transcript, Mr. Lewis?
I do not believe I reviewed it in full, no.
You characterized the Oath Keepers in a number of different respects, including that they were a militia group, right?
Yes.
And you're aware of the fact that Mr. Kreiner has described them as a terrorist group?
I did not review his transcript for that sentence, but that sounds accurate, sure.
Okay, so you agree with that characterization, that they can be characterized as a group that commits terroristic activities or actions?
As a researcher, I would refer to them as an anti-government militia, but that's my view as a researcher.
So what I'd like to do is kind of first drill down on your focus on January 6th, because that's the penultimate event that gave rise to your conclusion that this is a group that is advocating by force of violence to overthrow government, right?
Sure, yes.
And with respect to those individuals in Oath Keepers that you know are Oath Keeper members that were involved in J6, who are they?
I'm sorry, the individuals who I know to be Oath Keepers who were involved in January 6th, was that the question?
Right. Let's start with the number. How many?
The 33 charged defendants who I listed in my report.
And then other than those 33, and I'm not going to make you go through all the names, are you aware of any other Oath Keeper that participated in any of the illegal actions on January 6th in Washington, D.C.?
I would ask you to be a little more specific if possible when you talk about committing illegal acts, because I think it's an important distinction to be made between individuals who were involved in the conspiracy and not charged versus individuals who committed those same activities or committed similar activities and have in fact been charged.
Okay, and I'm not referring to the conspiracy with Stuart Rhodes or any of the other 32 that were charged. I'm just talking about any other Oath Keepers that were involved in illegal activities on January 6th in Washington, D.C. Are you aware of any?
Well, so I think I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to, because a number of the individuals I would reference in answering that question were part of that conspiracy who, for one reason or another, were either uncharged, unindicted co-conspirators, cooperating witnesses, or something of that nature.
Okay, of those uncharged, unindicted, cooperating witnesses who were part of Oath Keepers that were there on January 6th, what's that number? How many?
To the best of my knowledge, there were 4 other Oath Keepers who were in the hotel rooms in Ballston, who were part of the QRF. There were at least several others who were involved in the conspiracy or who were on restricted Capitol grounds, but who have not been charged, or their identities have not been made public by the government because they have not been indicted.
Okay, so the several others that were on restricted Capitol grounds that aren't part of the 33, clearly not part of the 4 that were in the hotel room in Virginia, what's their number? How many?
I don't have a complete accounting of that. It's not been made public. I think it's important to note that before Stewart Rhodes was charged, for example, he was referred to in the indictments as person 1. Michael Green was referred to as person 10. The government has provided the evidence necessary to secure convictions or plea agreements, but they have not provided a fulsome, wholesale accounting of every single individual, their full legal name, and their membership status or anything of that nature. As much as I wish they would.
Yeah, so I'm not going to pin you down on the name. That may be important at some later time, but right now it's the number, and you've conceded that the government presented these individuals, these unnamed individuals, by number. You've testified that you reviewed all of these charging documents. In fact, I think you told the court that you've looked through a voluminous amount of documentation relating to the court cases. Are you telling the court that you don't have an idea for the approximate number of people outside of the 33 that were involved or members of Oath Keepers that were present on January 6th committing illegal acts?
No, I'm saying that the government has not provided a full accounting. I can tell you that there were conversations around 40 Oath Keepers from North Carolina who took a bus up to Capitol grounds. I can tell you that the government has made reference, either in charging documents or in trial transcripts, to other unnamed individuals who were part of these conversations. I cannot speak to the criminal liability that they may be under. I cannot speak to their activities on January 6th because that's not been detailed in full by the government due to the fact that those individuals, to the best of my knowledge, have not been prosecuted to date.
So we have 40 from North Carolina, and that really was a splinter group, right? That was one that was not under the control by Stewart Rhodes.
I don't believe that's entirely correct.
North Carolina was an autonomous Oath Keepers state chapter that did not follow the directives of Stewart Rhodes.
Is that a question?
It is. I mean, do you know that to be different?
I would assess that if Oath Keepers chapters have tried to distance themselves from the national brand, that is well within their right. But given the fact that there are numerous communications between North Carolina chapter members who seem to be well aware of the activities of those, let's say 40 who took a bus up, or in group chats with Stewart Rhodes and with his lieutenants, I would assess that that is less of a splinter group of some, undetermined variety, and more of a group that was attempting to assert their autonomy or distance themselves from Stewart Rhodes.
Do you have anything in the record that you can recall today? And when I talk about the record, I'm talking about all the court documents that you testified that you've reviewed in preparing your opinion and in your research relating to the Oath Keepers, where Stewart Rhodes ordered the North Carolina Oath Keepers to do anything.
I think that's a mischaracterization of how the mobilization occurred.
Mr. Lewis, though, can you answer Mr.
Yes. No. There's nothing.
And you're aware in your research of Oath Keepers that there has, in fact, even before January 6th, been tension between the North Carolina Oath Keepers state group and Stewart Rhodes.
Yes.
And you're aware, in fact, that there's been tension between Stewart Rhodes in other state organizations, such as Florida, right?
Yes.
And that you've characterized earlier in earlier testimony that many of these state groups are autonomous.
They had a level of autonomy when it came to their local activities. Yes, sir.
But in your testimony, kind of as your ultimate opinion, you're conflating Stewart Rhodes with organization. Isn't that accurate?
I think that's an accurate representation of the state of events as they are. Yes, sir.
And with respect to the conflation of Stewart Rhodes with the organization, let's talk a little bit about what that is. In your testimony that you gave in your deposition, well, let's just start with what you told the court earlier today. You said you didn't know the number of members and Oath Keepers. That's not consistent with what you told me during your deposition, is it?
There is not a clear, verifiable number that I could pin down where I would feel confident saying there are absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, this number of active members. As I said in the deposition, as I will say again here, the Oath Keepers have reported 38,000 as that number. That number sounds accurate, but I don't have the wherewithal to do a tally count of how many members they might actually have in reality sitting here today.
Okay, and so that's not exactly accurate that the Oath Keepers reported 38,000 members. That's actually the leaked membership roll that came out last fall, right?
I believe it's both. Stewart Rhodes previously had used numbers in that 38 to 40,000 ballpark when claiming how many members they had. So I believe it's both, sir.
Okay, and the leaked membership roll, just because that has not been provided to the court yet, if you could give the court a characterization of what that leak or hack was and what was disclosed in that leak or hack and when it occurred.
I don't have the full information around that leak in front of me. I can reference my, whether it's the report or the CTC Sentinel piece where we bring it up. But to the best of my recollection, it was a leak at one point in time, the membership rolls of the Oath Keepers and included everyone who had ever donated to the organization in some way, shape, or form.
Well, so again, speaking in generalizations, the leaked membership roll of 38,000, that came from an actual computer hack, right?
I am not aware sitting here today of the exact specifications of how the leak itself took place, sir.
Well, but I mean, that's part of the repository of documents that you relied on in preparing your expert opinion as well as your supplement, right?
It's not part of the Program on Extremism repository. I referenced reporting around the leak itself to form a number of my opinions around the Oath Keepers, including that 38,000 number. That does not mean that I conducted original research on my own to ascertain the origins of the leak or exactly from which computer it was recovered from.
Right, and I mean, but you are generally aware that it was an unlawful hack of a computer system that the Oath Keepers controlled, correct?
Objection assumes facts.
Overruled. He's asking him a question about whether he knows it. But if he doesn't know the answer to it, then he doesn't have personal knowledge of it.
I am generally aware that there were public reports that came out regarding a leak of membership rolls. I have no other specific expertise regarding the nature of that leak or through which it came. All I can tell you is that numerous experts, besides myself, have verified the authenticity of it, have produced meaningful academic empirical research on the details of that leak itself.
And they've authenticated that the members that are reflected on the list generally have been members or have paid money to the Oath Keepers, right?
Yes.
And that membership list, in fact, included Representative David Eastman, the defendant in this case, correct?
Again, I have not reviewed the full list, but it is my understanding, yes, that Representative Eastman was included on that list.
So when we're conflating Stewart Rhodes with the organization inclusive of at least, you'll grant me, tens of thousands of members, don't you think it's important that everything that you've just testified to under direct with your attorney regarding these incitements to violence and other unlawful acts, that they be communicated to the membership?
Important in what way? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you're the one conflating the organization with Stuart Rhodes. So if Stuart Rhodes is doing something in his little corner of the world and not disclosing it to the membership in general of the Oath Keepers, how's that an organizational decision? Or how is that a reflection of the organization's goals and aspirations?
I would assert that if the things he's doing in his little corner of the world are posted on the main website of the Oath Keepers homepage, if he's blasting out emails to everyone on his mailing list using his name next to an Oath Keepers email address, if he's representing himself as the founder and leader of the Oath Keepers in his official capacity when he's making these statements, and in public and private communicating to his followers and members of the Oath Keepers his beliefs and what he thinks they should do, I would say that brings you a lot closer to making the point around his role as the head of the organization that he leads.
Well, so let's break this down a little bit. I mean, that's quite a bit to digest, but let's talk about first these private communications that you referred to. You made reference a number of times to this encrypted end-to-end chat called Signal, right?
Yes.
And isn't it true that that's just simply a secure text messaging application?
Yes, I believe that's generally how I described it. It's an end-to-end encrypted messaging application.
And tens of millions of people across the United States use that, right?
I have no particular knowledge of how many people use that app.
Are you aware that a significant component of the Alaska State Legislature uses Signal to exchange messages?
No.
I guess what I'm trying to get at, are you using the Signal app, the fact that it's encrypted, as some sort of untoward action on the part of Stuart Rhodes or Oath Keepers?
No, and I don't believe I ever asserted that merely the act of using a specific application is in any way untoward or evidence of anything. No.
Okay, let's turn next then to those that were part of the Signal chat group that you referred to. Again, we aren't talking about anybody more than that 33 or so that were part of the indicted co-conspirators that we've gone through already in your testimony?
I don't believe that to be true. Again, it's important to say that there have been references to who were in some of those specific chats. Again, the evidence that I have been able to review, which is primarily court records, has not presented a full membership list of exactly who was in what chats when. It has presented which individuals who were part of these conspiracies communicated with who and in which chats. They've made references to the first names of some individuals in passing, or reflected that some individuals who were on the board of the Oath Keepers were in, for example, the leadership chat. But again, because those individuals, as we've discussed here, are not part of the federal investigation, their public information has not been shared in the public record, which...
I've got that. So we don't have their names. I understand that. But you do have, well, let me back this up even a step before that. Again, you've reviewed all of the indictments that have been introduced as exhibits and admitted by this court, as well as the plea agreements. You've read those carefully, right?
Yes.
And within those, there are individuals that are identified as person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, correct?
In some of the indictments, there are individuals who are identified by that identifier, but who are not named at that point, yes.
And again, given your review of those indictments, given your review of these unidentified individuals except by number, what is the total number beyond the 33 that have actually been indicted that were part of these chats within the Signal group or the leadership chat group?
No, that number has not been presented, and there's only so many, there are only so many pieces of that chat that have been released by the government. I cannot go beyond the bounds of that to speculate how many other people who have not been named or even identified, let's even just start there, who might be part of those chats. For example, person 1 and 10 were listed in the indictment, and were later charged as Stuart Rhodes and Michael Green. But that identifier was not used in many of the indictments to discuss, for example, a random member of the board who has a username in the chat. That may have come up in the trial transcript, but that has not been something that I can assert as I have a clear number of this many Oath Keepers were in this specific chat, because the government has not released that publicly.
You said you reviewed the transcript of Stuart Rhodes' trial, right?
Yes.
And you've reviewed the indictments, and you're sitting here today before this court. You don't have an idea of how many other Oath Keepers were involved, but not named by the government, but involved in unlawful acts on January 6th in Washington, D.C.
Objection asked and answered.
I'm just giving this witness another opportunity.
All right, I was getting in the same spot. I think he's answered the question, but Mr. Lewis, can you answer that succinctly? Do you have any knowledge about the number of other people that were involved?
No, sir. The government has, to this date, never provided a fulsome accounting of exactly how many members were in any given chat. As I'm sure you're aware, the government will release as minimal evidence as possible to provide probable cause for the arrest and produce evidence they see fit to try their case. I cannot force them to reveal to me information that is within their ongoing investigations, unfortunately.
Well, and you conceded in your deposition that you aren't a mathematician, but the number that have been indicted compared to the total number of Oath Keepers is less than 1,000, right?
Yes.
And even with respect to, strike that. You said that you have reviewed hours of video of what happened on January 6th?
Yes.
And throughout those hours of video, of course, you've had opportunity to review probably, thousands of people that were involved in the Capitol on January 6th?
Yes.
And you're aware that Oath Keepers generally wear designations of Oath Keeper on hats or on garb. You said that kind of the attire that was used were stab-proof plates and other type of, shall we say, combat gear. Did you have an opportunity to count or give an estimate of the number of people that appeared to be Oath Keepers in the videos that you reviewed?
Yes.
And what is that count?
I would roughly estimate between 50 and 60 who are either seen on restricted Capitol grounds or who are seen inside the Capitol themselves.
And that's probably then inclusive of the 33 that have been charged, right?
Yes.
So maybe another 27.
Yes.
And out of an organization of, say, let's just say instead of 38,000, 30,000, 1/500th perhaps of the total number of Oath Keepers present in Washington, D.C., at least that you could verify visually.
Based on that assessment of the breakdown of membership, yes.
And sitting here today, you don't have any clue about how many people were part of the signal chats that Stuart Rhodes was part of, that you testified to earlier?
Correct.
And with respect to the website, you don't have any statistics on how many Oath Keepers accessed the Oath Keeper website at any one time, right?
No.
And with respect to emails, you've testified about the one or two emails that were produced through my client and some other documents that were produced by Stuart Rhodes that were reportedly sent out to membership. Do you have any idea what the list number was for the emails that were sent out by Oath Keepers in the, let's just say, in the 2020-2021 timeframe?
I do not have any particular information related to the internal mailing list of the Oath Keepers or how many individuals were on a specific list, or no.
Okay, you reviewed the discovery that was produced by my client in this case?
Yes.
And you reviewed the Oath Keeper emails that my client produced?
Yes.
Are you aware of any other Oath Keeper emails sent to the generalized Oath Keepers membership list other than what my client produced?
No.
And in the emails that my client produced, did you see any incitement to violence from Stuart Rhodes to the membership?
Are we, this includes the November 3rd email? Is that correct?
I'm including any emails that my client produced that he received from Stuart Rhodes that you said you reviewed. Was there any incitement to violence in any of those emails? I
would assert that the November 3rd email was a call to action. I do not, sitting here today, I cannot opine on if it reached a legal level of incitement, but it was certainly a call to action for his organization.
And you understand the distinction between incitement to imminent lawlessness or to violence and just simply advocating violence, right?
Yes.
And although you aren't legally trained, you conceded that in your deposition, and I think you're conceding that here this afternoon. In your mind, you're able to create some delineation as to what actions constitute imminent incitement and which just constitute advocacy?
No, I would argue that, again, despite having no legal training, I'm not opining that anything in the November 3rd email is an active, imminent call to or incitement to violence. What I am saying here is that the November 3rd email was a call to action by Stuart Rhodes to his organization to take action to stop the steal.
Right. And I mean, I guess reaching to any other information that you have, even outside of Representative Eastman's communications that he has provided in his discovery that you conceded are everything that at least you're aware of that came out of Oath Keepers. Was there any other generalized communication from Oath Keepers to its membership that you would constitute or that you would see constituting an incitement to violence or lawlessness?
Again, I would ask you to clarify if you're referring to incitement in the legal sense.
Well, you've already said you can't testify to what it means legally, so I'm asking you in a layman's perspective, is there anything that in your mind constitutes that?
Then I mean, yes, in a layman's sense, as an extremism researcher, I look at the November 3rd email and see it as a call to action of Stuart Rhodes telling his organization to be prepared to take action, to use force as needed against enemies.
Okay, so to be prepared, meaning sometime in the future, right?
Yes, on November 3rd, the email was a call to action for his organization to prepare for opposition against the U.S. government at a later date.
Right, in case certain things happen, such as the fraud not being actually proven or the succession of the presidency not taking place, something perhaps weeks in the future, maybe months in the future. Right?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand the if specific things happen.
Well, what I'm focused on is the imminency of action, right? What that November 3rd email was referring to, hey, you know, we have fraud. I mean, that was what, in fact, Mr. Rhodes believed. I mean, you don't contest that was his genuine intent, right?
I can't speak to his genuine intent.
Well, I mean, it was consistent, wasn't it? I mean, he said even clear back as early as 2016 that he thought there was fraudulent voting occurring throughout the country because of electronic tabulation.
Yes.
I mean, this has not been something that suddenly popped up in 2020. This has been going on for years.
Yes.
And so when he says, look, you have to be prepared to take action because of this fraud, he wasn't saying, hey, we got to do this tomorrow. He wasn't saying, hey, we got to do it next week. He wasn't even saying, hey, we got to do it in December. He was focused at a much later time, wasn't he?
This was, as you know, the first of many public statements by Rhodes directed at his followers, at the members of his organization, that told them that action was going to be needed. So this is the first step, as we've gone over here, the first step in a number of steps that Rhodes takes to tell his followers we have to take action. And so it goes from the November 3rd email of we must take action because the election is about to be stolen, to the open letters in December, to the Jericho March in December, to January 6th. And so I don't think you can just take this one singular email out when the Oath Keepers website was used to direct the followers to January 6th from this point all the way through the end of December and the beginning of January.
So I want to continue with that thought, but first just turning back to the Oath Keepers website for a second. Again, you have no statistics at all to reflect that even a majority of the membership knew about that website, right?
No, unfortunately, they have not yet given me access to the analytics.
Well, I mean, but you can get the analytics, and that's a public number, right?
I don't know if it is actually.
Okay, but you've never attempted to get the analytics, is that right?
I am unaware of a mechanism that would allow me to see how many clicks or hits there are on a defunct website sitting here today.
Okay, so you don't know, I mean, have you checked with any computer techs or anybody that's in the computer industry to find out whether or not you could get historical data on a website?
No.
I mean, again, you're using this website posting as some sort of generalized communication to the 38,000 members as a whole, but that's a speculation on your part, right?
Well, we just discussed the email that was sent out presumably to everyone on the Oath Keepers mailing list, including your client, and I would assume that using the official Oath Keepers website, which Stuart Rhodes did, to send a message to individuals who he believed would be actively checking his site as members of his organization, point pretty clearly to the fact that this was not Stuart Rhodes, as you said, out in a corner in his own little world, but channeling the power of his organization of 38,000 individuals by posting on the website he thought would be seen. Obviously, I can't speak to his effectiveness if he can only get, a couple dozen individuals there, but certainly the intent is clear that he wanted every Oath Keeper he can get his hands on to go to the U.S. Capitol.
And out of the 38,000 members, and again, I mean, you earlier testified you didn't know how many emails were sent out, but let's assume it went to the majority of the membership, right? 50 to 60 people showed up in D.C.
Yes.
That would indicate that maybe the word wasn't getting out, right?
I cannot speak to Stuart Rhodes' effectiveness as a salesman or as an individual who gathered people. I can only speak to the fact that his public and private statements clearly specify an intent to call as many of his supporters as he possibly can to the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
Or maybe it reflects that the membership, that 99.5% of the folk that didn't show up, they didn't necessarily agree with Mr. Rhodes.
Objection argumentative.
I'll allow the question and he can answer it.
I'm sorry, is that a question? Would you like me to respond to that assessment?
Well, so let me back this up just a little bit. You conflated the organization with Stuart Rhodes. You're saying that he made this call to action that apparently you believe went out to all of the membership, and yet only 1/500th of the membership showed up, at least by your estimation, on January 6th. So what I'm submitting to you is that you want to rethink the conflation of the organization with Stuart Rhodes. After all, the vast majority of them didn't show up.
That as an extremism researcher, as an expert on the Oath Keepers, I would respectfully disagree with the end of that train of logic. There's nothing that I have seen to suggest that Oath Keeper chapters or members of the Oath Keepers in any significant numbers have repudiated the core ideology of the Oath Keepers. It is certainly true, as you went over earlier, that individual chapters may have personally disliked Rhodes. By the time we get to January 6th, it's certainly likely that many individuals had personal issues with Rhodes and his leadership of the organization. But there's no evidence I've seen, and I would certainly not jump to the conclusion based on how many members he was able to get to the Capitol that he was in any way not speaking as an extension of his organization. Again, purely because of the fact that he was not using a Hotmail account. He was not using his personal, email account to reach out to individuals. He was sending email blasts, using his official Oath Keepers email, using the official Oath Keepers website that was active at that time. So that's how I come to that assessment, and I don't see any line that would change that assessment.
Right. Well, you've looked at the bylaws of the organization, and you affirmed for me during your deposition that the bylaws are reflected by what we now have as Exhibit U before the court. Why don't we take a look at that real quick? Do you have my exhibits in front of you?
I do.
If you pull up Exhibit U as in uniform.
Yes.
So, you understand these to be the bylaws of the Oath Keepers, right?
Yes.
Move to admit Exhibit U.
Objection.
All right, Exhibit U is admitted.
And with respect to these bylaws, they reflect what the mission of the organization is, correct?
It reflects the written goals of the organization as Stuart Rhodes envisioned them, yes.
Well, and in fact, as the membership understood them when they joined, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
What's his personal knowledge or basis for knowledge on that? You can board him if you know who's the answer to the question. But.
Well, he's speculating on whether or not the membership, we're endorsing Stuart Rhodes.
Regardless of whether he speculated on it, you've asked him a question. Does he have a personal knowledge to answer it?
Well, let me ask him as an expert.
You have to ask him the question.
Right, Judge.
Lay a foundation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's break this down and just first go through the bylaws themselves before I get to the ultimate question. So if you look at, for example, our mission, that's section 8.05, and I'll just direct you to page 8. What is the stated mission of Oath Keepers?
I'm sorry, that's 8.05. Yeah. Would you like me to read that paragraph for you?
If you would, please.
Oath Keepers is a nonpartisan association of currently serving military, reserves, National Guard veterans, peace officers, and firefighters who will fulfill the oath we swore with the support of like-minded citizens who take an oath to stand with us, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, so help us God. Our oath is to the Constitution.
Now, you said earlier that you didn't know that any Oath Keepers had repudiated Stuart Rhodes' statements. Is that a fair characterization of your testimony a few minutes ago?
Repudiated, I'm sorry, which statements are you referring to?
His statements that would be incitement to violence or even advocating violence.
I don't believe I said that specifically. I said I don't know of any individuals who to this day have publicly renounced the core ideology of the Oath Keepers as an anti-government militia.
Okay, do you see anything in these bylaws at all that reflect this anti-government type perspective that you believe that Stuart Rhodes represents?
No.
And do you see anything in these bylaws where the membership would be taking an oath or any commitment of loyalty to Stuart Rhodes?
No.
And so, isn't it fair to assume that somebody that joins the Oath Keepers, that sees these bylaws, they understand what they're part of? This is the organization. Isn't that what bylaws normally do? Establish the four corners of an organization.
It's a compound question, but it also calls for speculation.
There were two questions in there, but I also, given the expertise that you've offered Mr. Lewis it's not really speculation. He's proffered as an expert in these types of organizations, and so it's fair to ask him that question as part of his expertise and his understanding of these organizations. So, breaking it up, you can ask the question.
Do you want me to break it up, or do you remember both parts of it?
If you could, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Well, let's just start with the four corners. I mean, isn't it fair to expect that these bylaws establish the four corners of the organization of the Oath Keepers?
Objection vague.
Overruled. He can answer the question.
Again, I don't know exactly what four corners you're referring to, but no, I would not say that I take the bylaws to be a literal or even accurate interpretation of what the actual activities, goals, or ideologies of the organization were from the moment of their foundation. No.
What's the name of the organization again?
The Oath Keepers, sir.
And does that denote anything of significance in your mind?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Why is it named Oath Keepers?
It is meant to be a reflection of the oath that members of the military, of law enforcement, first responders, and elected officials will swear to the Constitution.
Now, I asked you during your deposition if you had interviewed any Oath Keepers in the history of your work in researching this organization, and you told me no. Is that answer still true today?
Yes.
And have you watched any videos of Oath Keepers meetings and how they start?
I believe I have. I could not tell you offhand the specifics of how they are typically run sitting here today.
So it's your position, and conflating Stuart Rhodes with the organization, that the oath itself really doesn't mean much to these members.
I would not assert that the oath does not mean much to its members. No, I don't believe I ever said that.
Okay, but if the oath does have meaning, does that reflect or does that change your perspective of conflating the organization with Stuart Rhodes?
No, certainly not. I can't tell you what the oath may or may not mean to every individual member who may self-identify as an oath keeper.
So, but as an organization, it's your view that Stuart Rhodes, at least kind of in the hierarchy of importance, is above the oath.
I believe Stuart Rhodes has shaped the organization in his image. I do not believe Stuart Rhodes is a patriot. I do not believe Stuart Rhodes follows the Constitution. I believe the organization is shaped in his image, and individuals who followed him, namely those who engaged in conduct on January 6th, were similarly abrogating any oath they may have thought they held.
Okay, and Representative Eastman, at least in your research, was not one of those 50 or 60, right?
Correct.
And you don't deny that Oath Keepers can form their own opinion separate from Stuart Rhodes and why they're part of that organization, right?
I have no ability to get into the mind of every Oath Keeper or what they believe, but I would say that anyone who is an active member of the organization certainly knew where Stuart Rhodes, the leader of this organization, stood, what he believed in, his clear anti-government ideology, and happily followed him despite his clear unconstitutional activity.
Okay, so active member, that's a new term. So we have 38,000 members, at least according to the leaked list, and now you're referring to active member. What is the difference between, are you referring to active members being the 50 to 60 that were present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, or do you mean, does that have a different connotation?
No, I would simply say anyone who has followed, even in passing, the public statements of Stuart Rhodes from 2016 until present, anyone who has opened the website once, who has looked at their Facebook or Twitter accounts before they were banned, there's no gray area when it comes to the true goals and motivations of the Oath Keepers, and it is certainly not a nonpartisan association that is designed purely to defend the Constitution. It uses the idea of an oath of loyalty to the Constitution as cover, as propaganda, nothing else.
Well, I know you mean that with respect to what you determined in your studies of Stuart Rhodes, but I guess I'm having trouble expanding that to the organization as a whole, saying that there is no gray area. So it's your view that anybody that opened that website at any time within the last couple of years that is donated to Oath Keepers should be conflated with the actions of Stuart Rhodes?
No, I said specifically that anyone who has even done a Google search of Stuart Rhodes, done a Google search of Oath Keepers, done a modicum of research on the activities of the group since their foundation would know quite clearly that the bylaws could not be further from the truth in terms of the actual goals of the organization as Stuart Rhodes has envisioned them, and which has permeated down throughout the organization.
Do you know why Stuart Rhodes said he started Oath Keepers? Do you know what event, the catalyst event was for that?
Sitting here today, I'm sorry, you said why he established it or why he said he established it?
Well, I kind of gave you two different items that you could respond to, but let's just stick with the latter, and that is, do you know what the catalyst, what the event was that gave rise to Oath Keepers?
I don't believe there was, in reality, to be clear, in the actual world we live in, I do not believe there was one single catalyst. I believe it was a mix of the election of the first African-American president, mixed with a general unease and uncertainty with the direction of this country, specifically around gun laws, that led Stuart Rhodes to create the Oath Keepers.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the first African-American president. You and I had a discussion during your deposition regarding racism and anti-Semitism, and it's your view that Oath Keepers is both white supremacist and anti-Semitic, correct?
I don't believe I used that exact phrase to characterize them, no.
Well, you certainly characterized Representative Eastman as anti-Semitic and also as a white supremacist, correct?
Yes, but I would not want to conflate Representative Eastman with the Oath Keepers.
Right. And you based your opinion of Representative Eastman on your research, right?
In part, yes. I based that on preliminary research I did when compiling the affidavit for this case in September.
Right. And when I asked you during your deposition about his white supremacy, you immediately, before responding to white supremacy specifically, went into his anti-Semitism, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to relevance. This case isn't about whether Representative Eastman is a white supremacist or anti-Semite. It's about something completely different, so.
It goes directly to this expert's ability to analyze and offer opinions. And it was stated in the affidavit before your honor. It was filed in support of the preliminary injunction.
I understand that, and I remember it in there, but can you walk me just a little bit further along about how are you attempting to impeach his abilities to offer an opinion?
Absolutely.
We'll allow you to go down this ways because if it is impeachment, and I want to see where he's going, but if we continue down this road for a while, then it might be a 403 situation, but I want to see where we're going. So, Mr. Miller, you may continue.
And as far as the 403 pertains to Representative Eastman, we'll waive it. I mean, I'm not sure that's the prejudice we're talking about or not.
I'm not talking about unfair prejudice.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting wait time.
Gotcha. So it was your opinion that you equate, or that anti-Semitism and white supremacy go hand in hand, right?
Yes. I mean, as a good example, Adolf Hitler, the Nazis were simultaneously, they managed quite effectively to be white supremacist and anti-Semitic. And often many of the conspiracy theories that we see promoted in those spaces are almost never just one or the other. They contain elements of both, which I think is an important distinction to make when we are analyzing extremism.
Right, and your basis for his anti-Semitism, and I'm talking about Representative Eastman, and his white supremacy, there were three things that you cited. Do you remember what those three things were?
Offhand, I would say he shared a link to a video regarding the Protocols of Elders of Zion, which is a well-known anti-Semitic conspiracy. He shared a link to a Hitler speech that linked directly to a website run by a Holocaust denier and neo-Nazi. And the third, I believe, was his conflation of COVID-19 regulations with some actions taken by Adolf Hitler, although at this point in time, it is not coming to memory.
All right, so isn't it true that with respect to the Protocols of Zion, I pushed you on that, and I asked you for your source, and you said at the time you kind of come up with it. Is it still your testimony today that you don't know about where that link came from or what the memory of that link is from?
It was something that Representative Eastman posted. I sitting here today, I did not prepare to have that link available. Again, I'm happy to return and discuss it in detail with you if you're interested. But sitting here today, I've not prepared for that line of inquiry, unfortunately.
Well, we already discussed it in detail during your deposition, and you couldn't provide it. So you didn't go back after that deposition and try to find it?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, 403, and I think it's improper impeachment with, if there's something to impeach with the transcript, let's see the transcript. I think he's doing it improperly.
Mr. Miller, I understand the point that you're suggesting is that there was an opinion rendered, and I'm picking up that you think that there's not a basis for it. There's no evidence behind that. I think he's answered the question, at least as far as he doesn't remember where that link is from, if you have it or if it doesn't exist one way or the other. He's answered the question, and I think we can move on from it.
Okay, we'll move on for the protocol's design. Let's go next to the Hitler reference. The Hitler reference was actually an image that you saw of Representative Eastman in front of a quote by Adolf Hitler, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't a link back to a site of somebody that was anti-Semitic.
No, those are different things we're discussing here. There was also a link to a speech by Adolf Hitler that linked to a website by a woman. I believe her name is Carolyn Yeager, who runs a virulently anti-Semitic Holocaust denial website that is very well known by extremism researchers.
And that was something that you didn't mention to me during your deposition, right?
I did go back and find that one, fortunately.
Okay. And with respect to the image of Adolf Hitler that you're referring to, was that the article that David Eastman wrote that was entitled "Something Troubled Me About Biden's Speech, So I Returned to a Holocaust Museum and Found This"?
It is possible that that's where that image came from. Sitting here today, I could not say 100% that that's where the image came from, but likely yes.
Is this the image? Can you see it from your camera?
I cannot, unfortunately.
Judge
You may approach the camera.
Yes.
And does this refresh your recollection about the article? Does that appear to be the article that you saw the image with?
It is. I can't see the text itself, nor do I remember the website. But also, I don't see any identifying characteristics of what the URL is or what the website title is from here. So unfortunately, I can't say one way or the other.
And it was your view that if somebody equates or draws parallels between Hitlerian comments or statements and content within another speech, that is an indicator of anti-Semitism, right?
I believe in my deposition, I said, which I will say again here, that prominent experts on anti-Semitism, including the Anti-Defamation League, have taken the stance that I hew to, which is that conflating COVID-19 restrictions with the Holocaust is anti-Semitic. And so in that same vein, going to a Holocaust museum and choosing of all images to take a photo next to a quote by the architect of the Holocaust would go further to me as again an expert to the point that there are potentially some anti-Semitic beliefs floating around in there.
So don't you think it would be important to review the context of what it was presented in, the picture that is?
Your Honor, we can object again.
I understand the objection, and at this point, I'm going to sustain it. Mr. Miller, we're leaving the Oath Keepers behind and moving quickly into a different realm of impeachment. I'm finding it's collateral. I understand the point that you've made that he hasn't reviewed the information that's behind that. The point's been made.
The proffer is, Judge, it's actually in fact, Representative Eastman, one of the other questions I was going to ask about this is introduced pro-Israel legislation. This article itself is warning about the dangers of the Holocaust. That's where the picture was. So this researcher took a picture, added this to a list of things that he couldn't provide me with cites, and still to this day we don't have, and characterized my client as anti-Semitic and white supremacist, which is all amalgamated in this. Because remember, Your Honor, and I'm with all due deference to the court here, that's what this thing is about with the Oath Keepers too, is amalgamating all these bad things. The Oath Keepers, they're white supremacists, they're anti-Semitic. He's making these conclusions on things that are thinly sourced, if even that. And in fact, with respect to this picture, it's deceptive. The picture is included in an article warning about the dangers of the Holocaust. That's what it's about.
And Mr. Miller, I've gotten the point as far as the portions of the affidavit that go to the claims of anti-Semitism or white supremacy, but that's not what I'm here to hear evidence about and to decide on. I understand the points, and you've made your point as far as the impeachment goes, but we need to move on now.
Okay. You made the comment in describing the content of Mr. Rhodes' communications in his private chat groups that he was expressing twisted levels or ideals, twisted ideals of patriotism. What is your position of what patriotism, what real patriotism is?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
You characterized Stuart Rhodes' communications as being, quote, twisted ideals of patriotism, end quote. What do you mean by that?
Stuart Rhodes, and by extension, the organization he ran, long attempted to use patriotism or their perceived oath to the Constitution as their first line of defense. So by saying, hey, our bylaws say we are constitutionalists, our bylaws say we uphold the Constitution. Therefore, any activities we are taking must be constitutional, and any activities by people who are on the other side of us must therefore be unconstitutional, because we can always point back to those four corners and say, hey, our bylaws say we would never have a felon in our group. Our bylaws say we would never engage in unconstitutional activity. We are patriots. We love the Constitution. Therefore, anything we're doing must by extension be constitutional. And that's the twisted aspect of it.
You had testified earlier that Rhodes ran the Oath Keepers in what you regarded to be a hierarchical military sense. What was his chain of command?
Specifically in relation to January 6th, the leadership consisted of himself, Kelly Sorrell, at one point Donald Sykerman, again, who was not charged and who could not end up attending January 6th. So that became Michael Green, or Michael Simmons, who was the operations leader. You then had specific team leaders. So Jessica Watkins, for example, was the Ohio team leader. Kelly Meggs, head of the Florida chapter, was the Florida team leader. There was the Stack 2 security detail. There was the QRF, all of which, had operational heads who then reported back up to Rhodes on January 6th.
And of those several dozen people that you just mentioned, how many of them were members or had any position in the Alaska chapter of Oath Keepers?
To my knowledge, none held positions in the Alaska chapter of the Oath Keepers.
Hold on one second. There was an objection prior to the answer.
Sorry.
Okay. So can you repeat the answer?
Yes, I'm sorry. To my knowledge, none of those individuals I just listed were members of the Alaska chapter of the Oath Keepers.
And are you aware of any type of statement, any type of communication from the Alaska chapter Oath Keepers that would be in any way interpreted as advocating by force or violence the overthrow of government?
I'm just going to object to relevance. We're not making any argument based on the Alaska chapter.
It's overruled. I think it's relevant.
No, I am not aware of any communications by the Alaska chapter of the Oath Keepers.
Right, and given your attorney's objection, you recall saying in your deposition that when I ask you, in fact, those organizations, referring to the state organizations, were fairly autonomous from the national organization, you responded, yes, they had a degree of autonomy when it came to local training, local mobilization, and they typically looked to Rhodes and the national leadership for national calls to action. So again, looking at the Alaska organization, are you aware of any communication from the Alaska organization that repeated any of Rhodes' calls to action to its membership?
No communications that I have seen have been related to the Alaska chapter of the Oath Keepers. So I have no knowledge one way or the other what any of their members may or may not have done in relation to January 6th at this point.
And you said in your deposition that kind of some of the catalyst events or some of the important events that the Oath Keepers were involved in included Bundy Ranch, Malheur Refuge, and Ferguson, of course, not to mention January 6th. Those were the top four, right?
I believe so, yes.
And you aren't aware, are you, of any member of the Alaska chapter of Oath Keepers that participated in any of those four events?
Sitting here today, I could not say one way or the other if any members of the Alaska Oath Keepers chapter, present, former, or current, or later, were involved in those incidents. Now,
is Oath Keepers currently led by Stuart Rhodes?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Where is Stuart Rhodes today?
He is incarcerated, I believe, in Virginia.
And he's in solitary confinement, isn't he?
I do not know that sitting here today.
Okay. Incarcerated, do you think he could still continue to lead Oath Keepers?
I don't think it's impossible, but I think it would certainly be much more difficult.
And I mean, is it proper to still say today that Oath Keepers is conflated with Stuart Rhodes when he's sitting in a jail cell?
To some extent, yes.
Are you aware that Mr. Rhodes has provided a power of attorney, basically handed over the reins of the organization to an individual named Colonel Siemens out of Texas?
I am not aware of the validity of that assertion.
Have you heard anything about it in the course of your research of Oath Keepers?
I have heard the name. I am aware that the defense in the conspiracy trial attempted to call him as a witness. I do not believe that was successful due to some medical issues that Mr. Siemens had recently suffered.
You're aware that Oath Keepers as an organization has been sued in one case, right?
In the civil case in the District of Columbia, yes.
And there's not a single allegation in that case that was brought by the District of Columbia that the Oath Keepers as an organization acted in any way to overthrow government by force or violence, right?
That is not the focus of that lawsuit, so I don't know why it would be included in that case.
What's the focus of the lawsuit?
The focus of that lawsuit revolves around injuries suffered by hundreds of Capitol Police and Metro Police, DC Metro Police, who suffered injuries responding to the events of January 6th. So it has nothing to do with the transfer of power or sedition. It revolves solely around the injuries to officers due to the actions of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys as organizations and the individuals who were there.
Right, and they aren't the only two groups that were sued in that action, right?
I believe they were the only two domestic violent extremist groups. There may have been some of the Stop the Steal planning groups, but yes, sitting here today, I believe those are the only two domestic violent extremist groups who took part in the events of January 6th in an organized, pre-planned way, who were named in that lawsuit.
Have you seen the assembly of indictments that we provided in our exhibit list? It's pretty voluminous, about almost 400 pages.
This is Exhibit AA, is that?
That is correct.
I have not reviewed them, but these appear to be, the Rhodes indictment, the Crowell indictment, the Caldwell indictment, and the various superseding Caldwell indictments. Yes, I'm familiar with these documents.
And with respect to those indictments in AA or the indictments that have already been admitted under the exhibits through your attorney's questioning with you earlier today, does the word overthrow appear in any of those indictments or plea agreements?
I do not believe so.
There is not any specific allegation in any of those indictments that any of the defendants specifically acted to overthrow government, is there?
I don't know if I would characterize what you mean by specific allegations to mean that.
Well, I mean, you know where we're headed with this, and that's the breakdown of the seditious conspiracy statute, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand that there's a difference between the word overthrow and the sub and substance of the alleged overt conduct that builds to this effort. And I'm also aware, again, having reviewed every single indictment, criminal complaint, statement of facts in the 920 cases, that as I'm sure you're aware, the Department of Justice brings charges that they think they can secure at a trial. And so that is reflected in the charging decisions made in those cases. And so I would assert, as someone who's reviewed every single one of these cases, as someone who's an extremism researcher and expert on the Oath Keepers, I would assert that the totality of the evidence that's presented by the Department of Justice in these seditious conspiracy cases clearly shows a conspiracy to, in sum and substance, prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power, which would result in the overthrow of the U.S. government. Because in this characterization, in this narrative that's played out, if the peaceful transfer of presidential power is prevented, the natural extension of that is President-elect Biden is not inaugurated on January 20th, and that current democratic system of U.S. government is overthrown, and President Trump remains in power in some unspecified role, which is clearly, by any metric, an overthrowing of the current form of U.S. government.
Wait a second. Or the transfer is delayed, vote fraud is uncovered, and there's some sort of other result. In other words, this is all in the future tense, right?
I don't understand the potential for a hypothetical there. I'm sorry.
Well, you use the words builds too. I mean, that's how you referred to this. It's actually how you referred to the Serbian allegations that were made earlier. This is all referring to future acts, future things that may or may not happen, right?
Yes, and it reflects an attempt by the Oath Keepers to get to that outcome very clearly.
Well, no. Not to be argumentative with you, but I mean, as you've already conceded, the Insurrection Act, the focus on vote fraud, those were the stated reasons for the actions that Stewart Rhodes took, right?
Those were the stated reasons by Stewart Rhodes, yes.
That's why he wanted to delay the transfer, so that the vote fraud could be uncovered that he believed happened on a mass scale in 2020. At least that's what he told his followers, right?
I think that's the important point. That's what he said. I think it's very clear that when individuals who are part of the Oath Keepers who have forcefully and illegally breached the Capitol building and who go in search of Nancy Pelosi, they are not attempting to ask her to delay the certification of the vote nicely. They are forcibly attempting to overthrow the U.S. government by going after the number 3 or number 4 in the line of succession. They are attempting to subvert the democratic process through their forceful actions on January 6th. It's not a question of the Insurrection Act or this imagined voter fraud, of which, again, there was none. This was a case of the Oath Keepers seeing an opportunity to forcibly overthrow the U.S. government.
So you're an expert on vote integrity now, is that right?
I would not say that, no, sir.
Could you read,
Well,
but
you just answered my question. You said there was none. I mean, even in your deposition, you admitted that there was some.
Sorry?
So are you now, is your position today that there was no vote integrity issues with the 2020 election?
No, I'm going to object to the continued references to the deposition without showing the transcript. I don't believe that's even true.
Judge, if he remembers, he can answer. If not, then we can go to the deposition.
right, hold on 1 second. So what's the objection?
Improper impeachment with like referring to the deposition testimony without showing a transcript or without even establishing a fact to impeach.
And so the question is revolving around whether or not Mr. Lewis has, I'm not fully sure yet of the questions, but it sounds like whether or not he has the knowledge to opine about whether or not there's been vote fraud, which then turned into whether or not there was any. He's allowed to impeach him by saying, you made a statement at the deposition. He's confronting him with it. If he can admit, explain, or deny. If he's not there, then he can go and impeach him with it. But he's made the first part, at least, of trying to impeach him with a prior inconsistent statement. So you can continue.
Do you remember us talking about vote fraud in your deposition?
I do remember us discussing vote fraud. I do not remember the exact content of that discussion.
And you remember telling me there was some unspecified voter fraud, but today you're telling me there was none.
I do not remember the exact phrase that I used.
Judge, I guess we can unseal the deposition. I'm at page 103.
Is there a copy of it?
There is, Judge. You've got it with the original. But let's save that till tomorrow because I've got some other questions regarding that too. I'll just make a note of it. And because the focal point of this questioning, Mr. Lewis, is on what was told to the followers. And what was told to the followers was that this was an effort to uncover the vote fraud that the Oath Keepers had throughout the history of the organization been concerned about, at least since 2016, right?
Yes.
And that there was nothing else as part of the incitement that you referred to, at least to the followers, that had anything to do with anything outside of the fact that the election in 2020 was stolen. That's why they called it Stop the Steal rally, right?
Yes.
And so these people that, even if the organization as a whole followed him, they were doing so because they thought the election had been stolen, and so according to their oath, they felt they needed to be involved. Not because they were trying to overthrow government, they were trying to perpetuate lawful government, right?
Yeah. I'm going to overrule it to the extent he can answer the question, but if he doesn't know, he doesn't know the answer to it.
That line of argument does not comport with the reality, simply because they also thought that there would be tens of thousands of Antifa members they would have to fight. There was no Antifa. There was no voter fraud. They saw an opportunity to forcibly breach the U.S. Capitol, to subvert the democratic process. Whatever reasoning they had offered in the past went out the door. That was not the central idea in their minds at that moment. They saw an opportunity and they wanted to follow through on this plan, which would keep President Trump in power, which is a clear, again, subversion of the democratic process, a clear conspiracy to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power, and by definition then, overthrowing the U.S. government as it was currently comprised and as it would have been comprised on January 20th due to the, again, complete absence of voter fraud in any way, shape, or form.
So when did the presidency change in 2021? What date in January?
January 20th.
And let me just back up a minute because we got kind of lost in the weeds on the whole Speaker Pelosi thing. Which Oath Keeper was chasing Speaker Pelosi through the Capitol or trying to find her?
I would have to refresh my recollection based on information in the court records, but the information in the Rhodes indictment makes clear that several of them were left the rotunda in search of Speaker Pelosi.
And these are unnamed Oath Keepers, or are these named Oath Keepers?
I would have to refer to the indictment sitting here in front of you right now.
So are you certain they were Oath Keepers, or were they just individuals that are unnamed?
They are Oath Keepers that are described in the Rhodes indictment. I would have to refer to the indictment. If I can do so now, I will happily answer that for you.
Well, let me ask this. Even if they were trying to chase Speaker Pelosi, find her, and do harm to her, violence in of itself against an individual, as terrible as it may be, that's not necessarily an attempt to overthrow government, is it?
Violence against the Speaker of the House as the electoral vote is being conducted in furtherance of a seditious conspiracy is clearly an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government. That's open and shut.
Open and shut, not as a legal expert, but as a lay expert, right?
As someone who is an expert on the Oath Keepers and their activities on January 6th, it stands to reason that their goal in breaching the U.S. Capitol was not to find voter fraud or was not to lobby Speaker Pelosi to change her mind or delay the vote, but to engage in a violent overthrow of the U.S. government.
Okay, and they, just to be clear, is again at most 30 to 50 individuals that were there on January 6th, but probably even more closely, the 33 who were indicted, right?
The Oath Keepers who were led by the founder and president of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, yes.
Lewis, hold on. So the objection is asked and answered. He answered it again. We can move on.
And with regard to communications from Stuart Rhodes to whoever was chasing or trying to find Speaker Pelosi in the Capitol, those don't exist, do they?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
You don't have any evidence that Stuart Rhodes asked anybody to go chase down Speaker Pelosi in the Capitol, right?
We have evidence that Stuart Rhodes directed his followers to breach the Capitol. He was convicted of seditious conspiracy. He was convicted of directing his followers to breach by force the U.S. Capitol building in furtherance of his plot that he directed as founder and leader of the Oath Keepers to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power. Therefore, all other overt acts committed by his subordinates, including Kelly Meggs, who was also convicted of seditious conspiracy, is in furtherance of the Oath Keepers' plot that day to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power.
So the conspiracy that the government has alleged and has actually gotten convictions on alleges a hierarchy where Stuart Rhodes was in charge of that conspiracy and directed his lieutenants to do what they did. Is that your theory?
That's not my theory. That is what was proven in a district court in Columbia recently. Yes, sir.
So you believe that that's what the evidence showed, that's what the jury found?
I do not believe that's what the evidence showed. I am relying on the jury conviction of Stuart Rhodes and Kelly Meggs to inform my opinion here.
And I mean, maybe you can show me then in the jury verdict where this was a directed event by Mr. Rhodes where he directed his lieutenants to do certain things and that was a finding of the court. You understand, right? The conspiracy doesn't necessarily mean that it's led by a single individual.
The entirety of the case revolved around Stuart Rhodes directing his followers to the U.S. Capitol. There is no other plausible, feasible way of examining this evidence than the fact that Stuart Rhodes led his group and the members of his group who were willing to follow him to the U.S. Capitol with this intent. That's why, as I'm sure you've seen, Stuart Rhodes and Kelly Meggs, his lieutenant, were the ones who were convicted on the counts of seditious conspiracy, and the other individuals who were merely part of Stack 1 were not convicted of that charge.
And you understand that part of it, not necessarily does the indictment reflect that the conspiracy was to actually go inside the Capitol. It also is inclusive of those that were on restricted Capitol grounds, which are outside of the Capitol, right?
Yes, it was both. Yes, sir.
And you also understand that there were multiple members of the Oath Keepers who had permits to be on the restricted Capitol grounds, right?
I do not believe that is the case as it relates to the grounds around the Capitol. I believe that relates to the peaceable demonstrations that did not take place, that were not authorized because of a riot that took place in place of those rallies on Capitol grounds.
You've seen our Exhibit P, which reflects the Capitol permits that were issued to allow Oath Keepers and others to be on restricted Capitol grounds outside of the Capitol building itself.
I have seen these permits that were given. Yes, sir.
Okay, and do you recognize them? Have you seen them before?
Yes, they've been introduced and widely discredited in every federal case so far where this defense has been issued.
Okay, but you recognize that they are permits that, by at least on their face, reflect that people are allowed to be on what would otherwise be restricted Capitol grounds, correct?
In the absence of a violent assault on the U.S. Capitol, yes, I don't believe that's included in the permit.
Right. They actually permit people to be on certain stages on restricted Capitol grounds, right?
Yes, but again, those stages were not part of the Capitol building where individuals breached violently, which is the key kind of part here, I think.
I'm sorry to step on you there a little bit, but you're aware why the Oath Keepers were actually originally present on January 6th, right?
I am aware of at least part of their purported role in the Stop the Steal rally that took place that morning. Yes.
They were actually asked to provide security for the Stop the Steal rally, weren't they?
Yes.
Isn't it true that Michael Green was specifically engaged as the operation leader to provide security for those rallies, along with the Oath Keepers that Steele Rhodes provided?
He was the operations leader writ large. How much that includes a legitimate role in providing security before the violent breach of the U.S. Capitol by the Oath Keepers is outside of what I have in front of me right now.
Right, but I'm asking you as to why they actually came, why the Oath Keepers were present on Capitol grounds before the riots began. They were there to provide security for those events, weren't they, pursuant to the permits that are at Exhibit B?
Well, and again, I would dispute that that's why they came. I would assess that, again, as the jury verdicts recently made abundantly clear, that the Oath Keepers executed a seditious conspiracy at the behest of Stewart Rhodes. If they provided security 6 hours before they violently breached the U.S. Capitol, then that is a footnote in my mind. The permits, I am sure you know, do not give them permission to breach the U.S. Capitol, nor does it give them any benefit to conspire to commit sedition or act using force against the U.S. government. So whatever they may or may not have done with Michael Flynn, whatever they may or may not have done with Alex Jones or Ali Alexander or any other individuals who had used the Stop the Steal rally as a pretense to bring a mob to the U.S. Capitol with the intent of disrupting the electoral process is neither here nor there in my mind.
So it's your view that providing security for these Stop the Steal rallies pursuant to the permits, that was just cover?
Yes, it was a perfectly legitimate security detail. I take no stance on their providing of security, but the fact that individuals who were part of the security detail concluded at the end of the speech, after their security detail had ended, after they had returned, after some of them had returned to their hotel, and then saw the violent assault of the U.S. Capitol and decided to return to help with the breach of the U.S. Capitol.
And the initial breach didn't have any Oath Keepers as part of it, did it?
Correct.
And so if it really were truly the design of Oath Keepers from the outset, that this whole security thing was cover to go into the Capitol, don't you think they'd be the first ones through the door?
No, I don't think that comports with any of the facts of January 6th. No.
With respect to patriotism, I want to go back to that because it's just one question, Your Honor. I know we're short on the day. You had given me an explanation of twisted patriotism. Would you please tell the court what you view to be proper patriotism?
Loyalty to the Constitution and to the democratic process of this country above all else.
And what do you mean by the democratic process?
The legitimate process through which this country is governed through peaceful, legitimate elections and the peaceful transfer of presidential power from one president to the next. I think the democratic foundation of this country is what it's built on, and I think that being a patriot is in part and parcel respecting the outcome and putting country over party or over political ideology.
And I guess maybe as a hierarchy in these values that you just described,
is the legitimacy of the process more important than the peacefulness of the process? Or is the peacefulness of the process more important than the legitimacy of the process?
I have no specific hierarchy through which I rank how I would interpret patriotism sitting here today, unfortunately.
And certainly, that a self-described patriot who claims that they've taken an oath to the Constitution sees that a vote is not legitimate because of vote integrity issues. Do you think that that individual, because they've taken action on that, by being present at the Capitol for a protest, should by those actions they then be banned from holding public office in the United States or a state thereof?
Mr. Lewis. Mr. Miller, what's the relevance?
I think it goes to the ultimate opinion that he's already offered in the case.
My understanding on his opinion is it's focused on the Oath Keepers. The extent your question focuses on whether or not your client, just based on his presence, is that what you're really getting? Is that what the question is?
Well, I think it goes more directly, and I mean, it's kind of a circuitous route to get there, but the argument that we've made so far with respect to the Oath Keepers is that the organization as a whole was there because of vote integrity issues. That's why they came. I mean, there were some that came for security purposes. There's no question about that. They were hired for that. But there are others that came because of what they were told was going on, what they believed was going on, and that was a vote integrity issue. And that they, too, as patriots, which has been characterized by this expert, their actions as being twisted patriotism, were there to ensure the legitimacy of the process itself. And effectively what this expert has done is he's amalgamating all of these bad acts that were committed by people that had these interests at heart, that wanted a legitimate process, that believed a legitimate process had not happened. And because of these acts, we're saying that those people should be excluded, not just Representative Eastman. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, this whole theory.
What's the question for this witness?
It goes to the patriotism of what he describes as proper patriotism. And I guess the question would be, if I can move directly into that, Mr. Lewis, if in fact a person, in their view, looked at the process as being illegitimate, and they were there on January 6th protesting, do you really believe that that constitutes somebody that intends to overthrow government?
I'm going to have the same objection, Your Honor, and I think, again, he's being offered as an expert on the Oath Keepers, not the Alaskan Constitution or anything else. Not every objection is an opportunity to do a closing argument.
I understand that point as well, but Mr. Miller, you're allowed to ask him a question about what's going on, but what it sounds to me is you're giving him a hypothetical, the question that I'm hearing is, if someone shows up and just peacefully protests at this, which is what I'm hearing you ask, is if someone peacefully protests and shows up because they think there's a problem with the election, does that mean that they're trying to violently overthrow the government? If that's the question, it's pretty straightforward, and he can just answer it one way or another.
Well, I think even better yet, I'll just get to the ultimate question I was going to ask, is that patriotism? Or is that twisted patriotism?
And Mr. Miller, I'm still not clear. Is the hypothetical I gave, is that what you're really focused on here? Because there's a lot of layers here getting to the ultimate question.
I'll withdraw. We're 3 minutes out from ending the day. I just was trying to find a way to close this up so that we can begin tomorrow again. But I don't think it's going to make much of a difference to your decision in the case, so I'll withdraw.
Okay, so you correctly predicted we're here at the end of the day, and I want to thank everyone for, again, there's been a lot of stops and starts here, and so I appreciate council's flexibility with getting us moving. I'll just repeat my suggestion that before you hit the road tomorrow morning, check the court system website to make sure that we're still going. The weather alert that I saw, it doesn't seem like it's going to be until tomorrow midday anyway, but I'm just flagging for people at some point in the next 24 or 36 hours, we may need to move online, because if it turns out that there's another bad weather system, we might end up dealing with a closure. So just be prepared for that. Anything else that we need to address before we finish for today?
A couple of quick matters, Your Honor. First of all, what time are we shooting to start tomorrow?
9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, if that works for the parties.
And I expected that we'd be done with Mr. Lewis today, so I will check with him offline to see what his availability is tomorrow. I'm not sure about that. And, I just wanted to let the court know, but we can.
And if it turns out he's unavailable, we could try and take witnesses out of order and return to cross. We're going to need to be flexible.
But, Judge, if we could find out now, I mean, he's online, let's find out whether he's available tomorrow so we can prepare adequately.
Mr. Lewis, are you available tomorrow morning? We'd be at 9 o'clock Alaska.
That's 1 p.m. Eastern time, correct? Yes, I'm available. It's fine.
All right, with that, everyone, thank you very much.
Your Honor, one other thing. So my client, it takes him about an hour to get here. He's north of Willow. So do we know what time the court will let us?
Usually, if there's going to be a closure, they make that decision. It seems like it's 6:30 to 7 in the morning. Nixle goes out. It's on the Twitter. It's on the Facebook. But again, I don't know for certain. Tomorrow morning, I don't think, from what I've seen on the forecast, is the problem. It's that as the day goes on, it looks like there's a system that's developing that then may cause a problem either at the end of the day, and which means maybe we spend the night here in Palmer for those of us that don't live here. And then as far as Thursday morning, if it really does get bad, that's especially when there might be a need for a plan to go remote. So I'm just flagging for everyone. It looks like we might have to deal with some more.
There we go. Get my sound back up and running. I'll turn off my listening device here so that you guys can hear just me and not listening to an echo going on there. Today has been 100% John Lewis on the stand. He is the expert on extremism and the Oath Keepers and everything to do about them, but he can't even tell us how many members are in the Oath Keepers to begin with. His testimony was nothing but opinions, hearsay, and his feelings on things. At the very end there that we all just got to witness, he was asked a very, very simple question. What is a patriot? Because he wanted to claim that the Oath Keepers have a twisted idea of what patriotism is. He wants to take the actions of 33 plus members that were there on January 6th on part of the classified insurrection that happened there on that day and conflate their actions as being responsibility of all 38,000 members. 33 people are going to dictate their actions of 38,000 other people. This is the testimony that was given to us today. More than once, John Miller, in his cross-examination of the defense for David Eastman, clearly pointed out his biased views, his clearly political narrative and agenda that was given in his testimony today. It was very obvious what we were looking at and the narrative that was being spun. If you took the time to actually watch the January 6th hearings that they had, all of them, all 6 of those that they held, you know for a fact that what John Lewis was trying to do today was spin a hearsay narrative that matches the narrative of the agenda that has been playing out in our nation since day one, trying to conflate all of the actions of 33 people being the responsibility of all 38,000 that belong to that organization. Patriotism has a very big meaning, and a big meaning to me. A patriot will stand up for their country's what is right and everything that has to do with our country, especially when it comes to withholding and standing up for our Constitution. And John Lewis cannot answer that simple question. He can give you the narrative of what twisted patriotism is in his eyes, of what he believes, his feelings, his opinion on what twisted patriotism is. But when he gives the idea of what patriotism is, he calls that elections, duly peaceful transition of presidencies and stuff like that. That is just a very, very, very small fraction of what a true patriot feels. Maybe he needs to go back and watch the movie with Mel Gibson in it called The Patriot, and maybe he might get a better understanding of what a true patriot looks like. Or Wallace is another good example. We could just go right on down the list, all the way down through our Confederacy, through American history, and everywhere else. Patriots are throughout our time and been recorded and reported on. The people that they now call patriots are at the time then was called insurrectionists. And if you think that what is going on right now isn't calling all conservative Americans, each and every conservative in America, a traitor, an insurrectionist of what they are currently doing out there, then you need to have a wake-up call and really start paying attention. Thanks to the plow truck finally showing up here today, I now can get out of my driveway as of about an hour ago. This means I will be in the courthouse tomorrow, live streaming this to all of you. Hopefully I will get enough bandwidth while I am there to continue to keep streaming this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and you will find it on Rumble within the next 12 hours. It will mitigate over to their platform. We are also now live streaming on NorthTube is another location. And when our website gets back up and running again, hopefully by the end of this week, we are always live there at Politadick.com. And when we get it back up and running, please go there, click the support button, help us grow. There is one last thing you can do before I will let you all go. Please go to rumble.com. Type in Politadick, Politadick, and subscribe. We need 100 subscribers there to be able to live stream to them directly and not have to wait for 12 hours later. We are doing our best to become uncancelable, uncensored, and be able to stream this to all of you no matter what. We are trying to get away from mainstream's control of the censorship that is going on out there. YouTube continues to keep trying to ban my videos, claiming election integrity, fraud, and or misrepresenting the pronouns, whatever, you just name it. I have had 3 infractions in the past month and a half. I have beat all but one of them. Every time they keep trying to shut me down, it's another 7 days I'm not able to stream onto YouTube, and it's done on purpose. They wouldn't even show me the one that they wouldn't let go and put back up there like they should have. They wouldn't even point to where in the video it hurt them and their community policies. They just wanted to claim the entire thing was misinformation. Yet we were listening to 2 Alaskan House and a senator that was running as candidates in the election during the ranked choice, and they were giving their take on what was happening in our elections and how ranked choice was playing within their current elections themselves. And somehow, somewhere, they want to claim that the things that we heard that day at the Alaska School of Government from these 2 folks was election misinformation, and that's the video that they did end up banning off of YouTube. That got me locked out for another 7 days. Again, take the time, like, share this video. We need to keep Alaskans informed. Again, you can find a hard copy of this video and the other one too, I should say the other 2 for today, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, also on Rumble and NorthTube, and soon you'll find it everywhere else. We are doing our best, like I said, to be uncancelable, and your support is making that happen. So go to our website, Politadick.com, click that support button, help us out, make sure we can continue to keep doing this, help make sure that we have the gas to afford to make it there in Palmer tomorrow, and hopefully we don't get snowed out and they decide to do this all by Zoom and I drive all the way there for nothing. I'm hoping to be able to find their notification at 7 a.m. that the doors are going to be open, and I will be able to be there in person live streaming this all to you, unfiltered and uncut. Thank you guys all for being here today. It is greatly appreciated. We will see you tomorrow in the morning, bright and early. This will begin at 9 a.m. We'll see you then.